The Battle of Good versus Bad Food, Part 3. We had to
Boom.
break this up into a couple part series because we could literally rant on this forever.
It's like a boxing match. We're deep into the rounds.
Oof. All right. So
Yes.
let's just dive deep. Here we go. Here we go. So last time we talked about kind of defining the whole bad. So this is bad part 2. And so what we're going to cover in this portion is chemicals. So
Oh,
a lot of times people when they define this whole like bad food, they say like, oh, well, there's a lot of chemicals. I can't read the ingredients because they're fake, they're artificial, they're XYZ, whatever you put a label on it, which we'll get into here in a minute. But yeah, so let's talk about the label of chemicals and how you use that to define these bad foods. This is our quotation. This is what we do. So here's a couple chemicals for you. 2-dihydroxyethyl 3,4 dihydro or dihydroxy 2-hydrofuranone.
mm.
Methane carboxylic acid, 1,37 trimethylpurine dione or dione. It's been years since I've been in biochemistry.
Yeah.
So you try and pronounce these. Tell me how it goes.
Yeah.
It's fucking hard, right?
Yeah. That's why I didn't even try. We let her.
And I'm pretty good at pronouncing things. All right. So WTF, what is this? Well, the first one, guess what? That's vitamin C.
Oh, that sounds scary.
Yeah,
What
next
does B
one.
stand for?
Oh,
Chemicals. Vitamin chemical. Mhm.
and we got vinegar. We got your vinegar, and then lastly we got
Yeah,
caffeine,
so nothing sweet.
which we all know we got a lot of caffeine up in these veins, right? Okay, where's our coffee holics here? But what we're saying is that there's a lot of names out there, right? So like let's look at this ingredient label. Okay, well, we got water, we got some sugars, aka glucose, fructose, sucrose, maltose, starches, blah 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 blah. It's a long ass list, right? It's a long list. It's a banana.
Yeah.
This is the chemical makeup of a banana.
So if you were to pick up a banana or something in the grocery store, flip it over, see that as the ingredient list, most people will probably go, "Oh, I can't understand half this stuff. It's bad for me. It's the devil."
Totally.
But then if they see a banana, it's like, "Oh, this is healthy." And so
Yeah.
this is why, like,
Labels
yeah.
don't necessarily mean anything.
And just because you can't pronounce something, all that means is that you're not a scientist and neither are we. So that is fine. No one expects people that aren't scientists to understand what scientific words mean.
Totally. Yeah. So just because it like sounds scary doesn't mean that it's actually bad for you, right? Because the reality is that like all foods have chemicals, regardless of how you view or label them or not. Like everything we are chemically made. We are. We all
Yep.
have chemicals. So now you're like, okay. But like, what about like food dyes and thickeners and like all of these things that are added into these foods,
All
right?
food has to die for us to eat it, so it's fine.
Oh my gosh. All right, so here's some common poisons. We got cyanide, we got formaldehyde. You probably have heard of them. You know, the spy movies, was the cyanide pills, right?
Yeah, a little
Okay.
capsule in their teeth and
Yeah.
they bite it and
Yeah.
they die.
Yeah. And then you got the formaldehyde, which is in, like let's do the what are they? The
Embalming or
yes,
something,
thank
right?
you. The
Yeah. So one
embalming,
kills
all of
you,
that.
one
Yeah.
preserves you.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
But they're naturally found in apples, tomato juice. You
So
got
that
cyanide in apples, and you got formaldehyde in tomato juice.
so that's how you keep the doctor away with an apple.
Oh,
Cyanide in the apple? No.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
An apple a day.
Because it
So,
keeps the doctor away, because it
yeah.
kills the doctor.
Yep.
Oh, there you go. All right. Okay. Give your doctor more apples, and then you won't need your doctor because he'll be dead.
Yep.
But basically, like we've kind of touched upon this before, is the dose makes the poison. So what we're saying is eat a wide variety of foods that fuel your body and your soul. So just because you can't pronounce it, just because it has chemicals, which everything has chemicals in it, the dose is what makes the poison when it comes down to it. And so, unfortunately, society uses these buzzwords such as chemicals, process, toxins, whatever you want to call it. They use all these buzzwords to grab your attention because it's very attention grabbing, right? And they make you believe certain things and they probably scare you. And if you think about like news, like what's the whole point? They are like fear mongers. They want to scare you into believing all of these different things.
Or they want to get you to the point where you're confused and you feel like you don't
Yeah.
know what you're doing. So then you have to listen to someone else because you don't know what to do because you're so confused and maybe you can't make the right decision. So you need someone else to tell you what is and isn't right or wrong, good or bad.
Yeah, it's super confusing. Like we 1000% understand. But then there's also like the opposite side of these buzzwords that we want to touch upon. And this is where it kind of like we'll call it specialty labeling. Like this is just what we're coining it, okay? And so when we're talking about specialty labeling, we're talking about like, oh, like what you see on packages. So when you see foods that are labeled like healthy, oh, this is from the non-GMO project. Oh, USDA organic. We got our gluten-free, we got our keto, we got our high protein, low fat, whole, whatever. Okay. All of these labels, they have some requirements. And honestly, it's not necessarily clear. There's all like if you were to think about like even when you do your taxes, you're like, oh, I need a good tax man so that he can find the loophole to be able to get me more money back. This is exactly how a lot of these like labeling work. Like these big marketeers, they have like the government, and well, there's the whole conspiracy of the government or whatever. But there are these, like there's the definition, but then there's this kind of like gray area wiggle room where it's like, is it this?
Well, even if it's
this.
even if it's a certification or a test, let's be honest, we have all cheated or know someone that's cheated on a test.
Yeah.
So like just because you pass the test and get a good grade doesn't necessarily mean that you're above bar.
For sure. Like, so like just because the label has something on it, and you're like, oh, it's fresh, it's healthy,
and sometimes
it's low fat, it's good for me.
And sometimes just because it doesn't have it doesn't mean that it's inferior to a product that does have it. Because a lot of these labels also come with a very high price tag. So there's some foods and things that are out there that are more worried about creating a quality product than branding it in a way that says organic just because it would cost more for them to do so, and they can't necessarily write that into their budget.
Yeah, like you'll hear that like if you go to these local farmer markets from a lot of these local farmers, they're like, oh, like it's organic, but like I can't pay for the labeling, like because it's too expensive.
They can't say that.
So yeah, it's like just experience it and freaking make the decision for yourself. And so other tactics that a lot of these companies use are, you've all seen them and we all know about them. They're like, oh, best before date. And the best before dates actually refer to the quality of the food. Not that it's going to go bad. It's just like, oh, it's best that you eat this before this date so that it still tastes good and you're not going to think it tastes like ass.
Yeah, or maybe a peak in nutrients, right? So it's like, oh, cool. Like this is when you will get the most out of it if you consume it. And anything after that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad for you. It just may not be at its peak.
Because even if you think like, okay, being a previous ER nurse, if you were to think about like expired medicine, there's still expired medicine is still good.
Just the potency.
It's just the potency. And like you think about like we send expired medicine to all of these other countries and they still utilize it. It's just maybe not as potent as if they were to get it before it expired.
And some of the Best Buy before dates, all those fun things are also tied with organic or healthy foods. And they also don't even have to do with efficacy or when it's the most potent. It actually has to do with more perception on, because people think that fresh food is highly perishable. So they will actually move the expiration date up. So people think, oh, this is really good for me because the expiration date is so close. And just like a lot of organic foods,
when in actuality, it doesn't technically go bad until like a week, 2 weeks, whatever later.
Yeah. And so then there's like all kinds of food waste or things like that. And a lot of things that are even in the, refrigerated section don't need to be there. It's just that people, or we have been conditioned to believe that, oh, if something is refrigerated, that it's
it's better for you.
It's highly perishable. So it needs to be refrigerated, which must mean that it's better for you. And then same thing with things that have high turn or an expiration and it's really close. People have the impression that, oh, it must be really good for me because it's highly perishable. So we've been conditioned to believe that highly perishable means fresh, which means it's good for you, which isn't necessarily the case. There's all kinds of fun, trickery in food labels to reinforce that belief.
Yep. And so let's look at egg labeling. All right. So when you think of like, you see like, oh, yeah, there's all these labels on eggs. It's like, oh, cage free. So like when I think of a cage free egg, I'm like, oh, there's like, you think happy cows from California, right? Well, cage free. I'm like, oh, these guys, they're roaming, grazing on the grass, whatever. This is what I think of when I think of cage free. Well, the actuality of cage free when it comes to the whole labeling and how they're able to label this is this is what it looks like. You got a whole bunch of chickens in this barn or facility or factory, whatever you want to call it. And each chicken technically has like about 1 square foot of space. That's how much. So this is cage free. So you see all these guys, they're cage free though. They're cage free.
They're not technically in cages.
Nope.
They're just
They're
in a
roaming around.
barn.
Roaming on
That's
top
the
of each
best.
other.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then think about like, let's think about free range. I would think the same thing, like free range, cage free. I feel like that would be interchangeable. Apparently it is not. Well, when it comes to free range,
That just means they have like a catio, like they
yes,
the little the little
a
chicken,
chickio, a
the little
chickio.
little chicken door to go in their little outside. But it doesn't actually increase like their movable square footage. It just means they could fit a little bit more chickens because now they have an outdoor area.
Yeah, and so like, and a lot of the times, like the birds don't even necessarily go out because apparently there's these big industrial fans that blow out all the ammonia from all of these birds that are just packed in, and so then it makes it difficult for them to exit. So like essentially, they're kind of the same thing. Like maybe it's a little bit better. Who knows? Who knows? Like realistically. And so, what's the point? Like essentially, like labels, they're kind of pointless. Like if you honestly like think about it, like it's pointless. It's really just a marketing tactic.
Which is why they come up with more and more. Because like ultimately, like, years ago, they didn't need all these labels because people, one, like the way that chickens were raised and things were produced was very different. But people weren't scared. They didn't think, oh, this is bad. So then people become, aware, then they become scared. It's like, oh, like, how can we spin this? How can we market in a way? What's a new shiny package that we could put on this to make people at ease or make them feel a little bit better? Even if you think about, with beef or the past couple of years, it's like, oh, like beef was beef. Then it was like, oh, it's grass fed. Then it was grass fed, grain finished. It
Oh,
was grass fed, grass finished.
there's
Like
so
all
many
of these things. And like the
things.
reality is that like all of those things are just marketing ploys to calm people down because they're
And then
worried about their.
well, yeah, that, and then to say like, well, like this product's better than this product because there's so many products out there nowadays. Like, how do they compete with one another? Well, they have to look better than each other, or they have to put that scare tactic out there so that then it can work against their competitors or whatever, right? And so what we're trying to say is make your own decision. Like, don't get me wrong. You're going to go to a farmer's market and you're going to get eggs, and those yolks are probably going to be very vibrant, very orange, and they're going to probably taste better than what you've gotten at the grocery store.
And if you got chicken breast from there, it'll probably look like a chicken tender.
Yeah.
Because it's not full of hormones and juiced out of its mind. So like this is the chicken tender. No way this is a breast, but it's a breast. It'll probably taste delicious.
But like
this big, like
but like a lot of this stuff is like you just have to go out and experience it and try it. And like I'll tell you like up front, like not everybody's going to be able to afford the eggs at farmers markets. They're not going to be able to afford the chickens, the breasts. They're not going to be able, like, and so like that's okay. Like you can still get results by eating steroided, chemically processed things if that's all you have access to.
And let's be real, like just because a chicken or a cow is injected with steroids doesn't necessarily mean that when
You're not
ingest
gonna get jacked.
you're not infected with the same steroids that they were injected with. If that were the case, then
everybody would be jacked.
yeah, everyone
walking
all
around.
humans would be walking around with
looking like him.
all kinds of muscle because they're eating steroid injected, chickens and cows. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
But then, like she said, just make the choice for yourself because sometimes, like maybe you do like the way they taste, but to get it is a little bit further. It's a little bit more expensive. It's not as convenient. And so sometimes like making say, hey, this is more convenient. This is something that's a little bit more enjoyable. This is actually doable and sustainable long term. So you're not necessarily sacrificing convenience for overall quality of life and health, but you're saying, hey, this is something that I can do that's sustainable, that I can enjoy, is going to be better for you long term than saying, hey, look, I need or want to eat all organic, or I want to have my own chickens, but it's unrealistic for me to do so.
Yeah. And so essentially, like, unless you are growing your own chickens or and trust the farmer or you've experienced it and you've seen those orange eggs, you've gone to Europe and you're like, oh my gosh, I eat the pasta and it's amazing and I have no effects or whatever you want to call it. It really, like, a lot of these labels don't mean anything. And so just, we want you to be aware that things aren't always what they seem, but don't let that paralyze you. And use reputable studies. There's a lot of studies out there. We'll say that they are bullshit. Learn to think outside the box. But the people and the studies that we've seen and the people that we have seen analyze these studies, these are two people that we know, like, and trust, and where we get a lot of our information. And so Dr. Lang Norton and Dr. Trevor Kashi, you can look them up, but highly recommend if you're like, I am so unsure, I would like to know more about this study. They deep dive, break down into how to read studies, and
then they also they'll read
debunk,
it,
we'll say.
they'll read the studies and they'll break it down simply. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, like this is what it said, this is what it meant. They'll do a really good job breaking it down into lay terms, so that even if you aren't a scientist or a doctor, you can understand what the study meant. And so a lot of times, like, studies are done to prove a theory, and so when they display the information, they are proving or disproving something. So they talk about it. It's like, oh, like the entire study was built around trying to prove something. And so you can do a lot of things to prove something. Doesn't necessarily mean you do everything to say this is law. And so, like, that's why studies can be dangerous, because if someone says, oh, like cheese is bad for you, they'll do everything in their study to prove that that theory is right. And then they release the studies. Oh, look, we were right. It's like, well, there's other variables.
Yeah. So as we talk about often, this world is not black or white. It is totally gray. There's a lot of context behind it. And so in conclusion, all foods have chemicals. All foods have chemicals, regardless of how you view them or label them or whatever. And the dose makes the poison. So remember that society and marketers use these buzzwords to make you believe certain things about foods, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those are the truths or facts or whatever it is about those foods.
Like from the very beginning of the presentation, something that people hear all the time, especially in today's day, is like, if you can't understand the words on the label, then it's going to kill you. But if you refer back to the banana, or if you put a label on things that are grown and pulled right out of the ground, you wouldn't understand anything that's inside of it.
Yep. So be sure to join us for part 3.5 to discuss processed foods. And if you have any questions, submit a burning question or apply for a breakthrough session inside our Fit Foodie coaching course.